Hey everyone. Thanks, Emily. Thanks everyone for joining us. See a lot of familiar faces. It's nice to see you all. Hi, Henry. Hi, Karen. Hi, Hannah. Hi, Lou. We are just getting started as people are joining. If anyone wants to come off mute or to type in the chat to introduce themselves or to share something that they are thinking about or working on, we'd love to hear from you before we get started more officially with our agenda today. Hey, Anne. Hey, Jacqueline. Hey, Andrea. Everyone's quiet. Tired from the long weekend, or maybe we already all know each other. Well, it's nice to see everyone. Um, this is a monthly digital inclusion working group for libraries. We talk about a topic, digital equity, digital inclusion topic related to libraries and kind of ongoing policy efforts every month. This month, we'll be talking about the Digital Equity Act and navigating some federal grants, or I'm sorry, that was last month. Um, um, navigating the Digital Equity Act and the capacity grant and the competitive grant. So Aaron Lorandos and Michelle Simon and Anthony and Corey Christians will be speaking to us from Arizona and the broadband office there. So this is a monthly peer-to-peer informal call. You are welcome at any point to type a question into the chat or to come off mute and ask a question or share an insight or comment. We hope for this to be an engaging conversation, so please feel free to chime in about what's going on in your state or at your library. We'd really love to hear from you. Hey, Liz. Hey, Marika. Hey, Jill. Good to see folks. Okay. Well, like I said, at any point, feel free to come off mute and say hi, or type in the chat and say hi, or share an insight or a question. We have some policy updates to get started with, and then I'll turn it over to Aaron and the crew. All right, so first of all, most of you have probably seen that the FCC's cybersecurity pilot for schools and libraries, the draft report and order was issued. Let me find the link to that and share that in the chat. So this is overall good news, although the FCC didn't take any of our suggestions. We had hoped for a shorter pilot period, because we know that the money is needed urgently to protect schools and libraries. As James just shared before some of you got on the call, maybe you've already heard, Seattle Public Library was just a victim of an attack. So this is, much needed. We are working on some details with the FCC. We have some meetings tomorrow because there seems to be maybe some barriers to access for smaller libraries, as well as a funding cap that would not cover the needs of the largest library districts in the country. So 175,000 for libraries that have 11 sites or more. But for really large systems like Chicago or Houston or New York or LA or on and on, that wouldn't be a very big budget. So we have some conversations to clarify some of that this week. And then they will be voting on this on June 6th. And we think that it's possible that it will be a unanimous vote to move this forward. So overall good news, but a few clarifying points to make so libraries can best engage and be successful with that program. Anybody have questions or thoughts on that or heard anything else? Moving on then, some of you may have seen some news about the Kids Off Social Media Act introduced by not tense. So the eyes on the board, which was Senator Cruz, and then picked up by the Kids Off Social Media Act from Senator Schatz. So this was mostly targeted, it was targeted towards schools, but it made it harder for schools to get E-rate funding. They were using E-rate as kind of a way to ensure that filters were being used at schools to prevent students from using social media. So ALA signed on to a number of letters against that, coming out saying that, there has to be a better way to protect students from the ills of social media. But that, making it harder to get E-rate is a slippery slope. And so we wanted to join our school colleagues on that. Last week, the markup was canceled. So we think there was a good number of others reaching out and pushing back and kind of voicing concern about that bill. So that's really good news, but we do expect that it will probably come back up, not this week. They're out on recess, but then maybe next week. So we are keeping our eye on that. Yeah. Also E-rate, the hotspots, we have no new information about the timeline. We had heard that it was supposed to come out early spring and they got delayed because of the legal challenges the Wi-Fi on school buses was facing. So they wanted to focus their attention on Wi-Fi on school buses and some of those court cases, because obviously the impacts of those legal challenges would cause concern for the Wi-Fi or the hotspot lending as well. So we're optimistic that that's still coming this summer. We've heard that that's still a priority of the chairwoman, but no firm timeline at this point. And then finally, in terms of policy updates, of course, you all know, but today is the due date for state plans for the Digital Equity Act Capacity Grant. So we expect for state plans to start being approved very soon. They're approving them on a rolling basis. We know that a couple of states, at least for sure, submitted before the deadline. So they would be able to have started reviewing those and can make a decision and announce the funding request sometime this summer. So it could be sooner or it could be towards later in summer, but that will kickstart the competitive grant process as well, as we've discussed before. And then finally, we record these digital inclusion working group calls, and we put them up on our YouTube page. So if you've missed a past meeting, you're interested in what we've discussed in the past or in the future, I just dropped the link to our YouTube page in the chat. So definitely check that out. And I think, yeah, Emily, I'll pass it to you for a couple more announcements.
Sounds good. Thanks, Megan. So for our June Digital Inclusion Working Group meeting, we will be meeting in person at ALA Annual Conference. Excuse me. We will be meeting on July 1st from 9 to 10 a.m. In the Marriott Del Mar room. We'll post additional information about that in the Connect space, but we're excited for folks to come join, grab some coffee, and connect with everybody here. And the next kind of update that we had is, so when I shared our announcement on the Connect space about our meeting for this week, we asked to provide kind of any feedback on our newly updated What Your Library Needs to Know, Developing Your State Digital Equity Capacity Grant Funding Program resource. So if anybody has anything, if you had time to review the resource, and if there's any kind of feedback anybody has on the resource, specifically thinking, is this type of resource helpful? What would be more helpful moving forward? Kind of what support do you feel you would need given where things are with the state capacity grants and then the upcoming competitive grants on the horizon? So if there's any feedback or thoughts you have right now. We can also take questions towards the end, since I know we want to get into our presentation.
Okay, sounds like we are good on our policy and meeting updates. But like I said, feel free at any point to ask a question in the chat or to come off mute. We'd love to hear from you. But I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Erin Lorandos from the Arizona Broadband office and her team of Arizona folks. Thank you, Erin, and everyone for being here.
Thank you so much for having us. This is a pleasant surprise in my inbox, so thank you. As Megan mentioned, my name is Erin Lorandos, and I am the Digital Equity Program Manager here in Arizona. My job is with the Arizona Commerce Authority. So here in Arizona, and it's different in every state, so don't assume that it's the same where you are. But here in Arizona, the Arizona Commerce Authority is the administering entity, is what it's called, for both the BEAD side of things, which is the infrastructure, trenching in the ground, laying the fiber, connecting the people, and also the Digital Equity Act piece of the IIJA work. And so I am a librarian. Don't kick me out yet. I've been working in libraries for about 20 years, both here and where I'm from, back in Wisconsin. I've worked primarily in public and academic library spaces. And a couple of years ago, I had the opportunity to really shift my work into this digital equity space. When I was in public libraries, I was the digital navigator, right? I was hosting the computer classes. I was doing the one-on-one tech help. And as that started to become more and more of my job, it really made that shift apparent and easy, and in great timing, because that's right around the time that a lot of these offices were being stood up and all of that. And so I'm going to let everyone introduce themselves, but I do want to say that before coming to the ACA, I was in Anthony's position at the state library as the digital inclusion library consultant, and our federal program officer from NTIA was in that role too. So there's a lot of connection to libraries in the digital equity, especially work that's happening here at that state level. And I don't want to monopolize too much of this time, but I just wanted to acknowledge first, thank you to Anthony and Corey and Michelle for, listening to my frantic call, because they are definitely shining stars here in Arizona, and I'd love to hear from them as well. So I'll turn it over. Anthony, maybe I'll have you introduce yourself first or next, just because I already kind of called you out. And then you can popcorn it to either Corey or Michelle.
Awesome. Thank you, Erin. It's great to be here. As Erin mentioned, I'm the digital inclusion consultant with Arizona State Library. I was actually recently working at ASU Library before that, and then a few months ago I transitioned to start working with Arizona State Library. So my background is in libraries. Before working at ASU, I also worked in public libraries around Arizona for about 5 years. And just kind of echoing what Erin said, working in libraries, I think we're all aware that digital inclusion is a big part of that, and helping people with digital literacy skills and devices. And so seeing this role really seemed like a natural fit for me. And now that I'm here, I'm kind of working on our Connect Arizona in digital inclusion initiative, which is essentially a virtual platform that we use for our digital navigators who help Arizonans across the state connect to low-cost internet devices and digital literacy training. And I'd say that's basically my introduction. So I'm happy to pass it over to Michelle.
Awesome. Making sure to unmute prior to chatting away here. Michelle Simon. I am the director of the Office of Digital Inclusion for Pima County. Our office is very new, being established, well, in theory in August of last year, but in reality, December of last year. Prior to that, I worked for the Pima County Public Library for the last 8 years as the Deputy Director of Support Services, overseeing, I'll call it, all of the back of the house stuff, including technology and the digital equity and inclusion efforts of the public library. My job right now is a direct result of all of the work that I did at the public library and working with community organizations to move digital equity and inclusion efforts forward in our county. And Corey, go for it.
Thanks, Michelle. Appreciate it. I'm Corey Christians. I'm the county librarian for Yavapai County and director of the library district for Yavapai County. Originally, I got my start in South Dakota, working for the South Dakota Library Network, which was a consortium of 90 libraries, and took that technology background and brought it to Yavapai County, where, among other things, we have a 59-member library consortium that I worked on the technology background for about 20 years before I was appointed as the county librarian. Now I am administratively responsible for that consortium, plus run 15 library branches, a courier service, all sorts of fun stuff. But that technology background made it so that the chairman of the Board of Supervisors here, which is similar to your Board of Commissions or your county commissioners in other areas, wanted to tap me to help work on the ARPA build out, the American Rescue Plan Act build out for broadband. So we've been working on that along with the county school superintendent for the last 3 years, in which we've built out or actively are planning on building out to about 16,000 passings throughout Yavapai County. So to shift from worrying about the digital divide from within the library to actually being out there closing the digital divide for community members that need that connection has been very exciting work, which then, of course, has evolved into the BEAD process and seeing where we can assist in that area, not only in building the road, but also making sure that we can get people cars and learn how to drive on that road as well, which is a big part of what we're talking about here today.
Thank you, everyone, for those wonderful introductions. So you can see there's lots of paths to this, right? Before we dive into questions, I just kind of wanted to give a broad overview of what has happened here in Arizona. This general roadmap is very similar in every state. So if you haven't heard about some of these things happening, you can assume that similar things are happening in your states. So the first piece of the Digital Equity Act was a planning grant that every state was awarded. And here in Arizona, we got just over $1 million basically to do some research and write the plan, okay? So the deliverable for us here was going, and having conversations, both in person and virtually, and paper forms and all of that with basically everyone in Arizona. Nearly 80% of people here in Arizona fall into one or more of the covered populations that the Congress identified, in the original legislation that historically have had barriers to digital equity. And so every state went through a process to figure out exactly what those barriers were in their state, and then also kind of laying out a roadmap on potential ways to break down those barriers and ensure that everyone really, but especially folks who had historical, inequity, were able to access these resources and get the cars and get their driver's licenses and be safe on the road, to expand on Corey's metaphor. So this whole last year was spent with that process, writing the plan, and every state had to have that plan in by the end of March. And then in early April, most everybody heard back that their plan was approved. But right at that same time, we were given the notice to funding opportunity, or NOFO, for the piece that we're working on right now, which is the capacity building. So basically, you write the plan. Now, this is the money that the government's going to give us to enact the plan, right? Or at least large portions of it. And that's key, because when we were writing the plans, we as states didn't know exactly how much funding we were going to get for the capacity piece. And so many of us wrote plans that, were big, right? And laid out ideas that were big for our states, and necessarily so, because those historical inequities are big. And so then we were told how much money we were going to get. And now, actually today, as Megan mentioned at the top of the presentation, that today our applications are due for that money. So we wrote the plan, then we had to apply for the money, and we had to kind of prioritize as states which things in our plan we wanted to try to take a crack at in the first couple of years here. We do anticipate that there will be 2 additional opportunities for every state to get more capacity funding. And so we will kind of go back to those plans and look and say, all right, well, this part needed more, or maybe we had to skip this one because we didn't have the funding and we felt that, you know, this first piece was going to move the needle quicker or in a more effective way. And so we'll have opportunities to go back and do more. But in this first round here in Arizona, we are really looking to increase the capacity around some of these digital skills training that we talked about, those digital navigator services. Anthony mentioned one large one that, you know, kind of covers the entire state. We have other digital navigator programs that are already in action here in Arizona. And so we know that that's a key piece to addressing those barriers by every covered population, is having that in-person repeated help. I know Lowe's on the call, so I gotta give NDIA credit where credit is due, because the Arizona Digital Navigator model is directly modeled after the NDIA model. And so, you know, why reinvent the wheel? Let's you know, increase the capacity for the programs that are happening. We're also going to be focusing on creating local points of contact in each of our counties. We do have 15 counties here in Arizona, plus 22 federally recognized tribes. And those are all, you know, sovereign nations, right, that we're working with. And so it's not just the state of Arizona, but it's the state of Arizona and all of those tribes working together. And so we are going to be creating points of contact within each of those communities that will ensure that we have alignment with everything that's happening at the state level, everything that's happening at the local level, and really, you know, give that local focus the support and credit that it's due. So folks like Michelle in Pima County, who, you know, are already really well engaged in their areas and know this stuff, will be on the same playing field as some of our smaller, less resourced counties that maybe don't have those resources right now, maybe hadn't even heard about digital inclusion prior to us, you know, coming around and talking last year, right? And so those are some of the big things that we want to do in this first pot of money that we've received. And again, every state's going to be different. Every state has different priorities, and it's going to be super interesting to see what this next couple of months bring as, you know, those plans come to fruition and get the funding and start some of these balls rolling. So I want to pass it off to, you know, to the other folks here that are on our panel, if you want to call it that, to talk about, you know, when they heard about all that stuff, what are they doing locally? And then, of course, any questions that people have, we are happy to take as well. So I don't know, do you want to rock, paper, scissors for who gets to talk next?
I think Michelle has really developed things quite a
Yes.
ways. That it would make sense, I think, for her to go next.
Well, that's
Agreed.
sweet. Thank you. Pima County, all the things. So back in 2021, so this overlaps with everything that Erin was talking about, because in the library field, we know very well that there is a digital divide. It's not a surprise, but everybody in the world, when COVID hit, realized that there's a digital divide. All right. But the one thing they couldn't do was send people to the library because many of our libraries were closed. The stories of people out in the parking lot using the Wi-Fi, that was a real thing. In Pima County, we had a lot of that happening. And for those of you who aren't aware of Pima County, we are 9,100 square miles. You can fit Connecticut, Delaware, and Rhode Island all within our county. That's how large it is. Okay. And we have very rural areas. So from the center of Tucson, it's 2 hours and some change to Ajo, which is our farthest city west. Okay. So we have a lot of issues that are happening in our community. Kids families living in rural areas that couldn't just drive into Tucson to get some internet. So the library, we ended up buying hotspots so that people could check them out. We now have, as a result of the emergency connectivity funding, Chromebooks that are checked out. But we also created an initiative called Hotspots Around Town. And those are hotspots that are, we did this in conjunction with Cox Communications. The library pays for the internet service, but the hotspots are in places like parks, boys and girls clubs, community centers, public health offices, places where people kind of congregate on their own so that they can have access to the internet. And we did all of that as a task force. Well, as part of all of the funding that has come about that is related to the Digital Equity Act funding and what is coming, the bipartisan infrastructure law, one of those programs is the Enabling Middle Mile Broadband Infrastructure Grant Program. And so our task force, we work together with all of the municipalities in Pima County to put forward a robust grant that would benefit the entirety of the county. And we were awarded from NTIA, the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, we were awarded $30.3 million for a just over $43 million project to build a 134-mile fiber optic ring around Pima County's urban core. And what that will do is that will reach areas in our county that have more unserved and underserved households. So you'll notice the same lingo that we're using, right? Unserved, underserved, specific populations, covered populations. And this ring not only benefits Pima County, but the reach is such that Pinal County can benefit from it, Cochise County, and Santa Cruz County can benefit from the ring that we are putting in. So internet service providers will be able to use that and build to areas of our community that would have been cost prohibitive had we not put that ring in, okay? So why do I mention all of that? Because it all plays a vital role. Access is an important thing when it comes to digital equity and inclusion. So everything that Aaron was talking about in Arizona's digital equity plan, there are big pieces that have to do with access, but it's not just access, it's the adoption. And that's where that digital navigator program, yay NDIA, okay, just gonna say, that is a best practice national model. Use it, repeat, please. But that is why that model is very important to increase adoption to internet, and to increase the access to computers as well, because what is happening is people don't have the opportunity. Somebody might say, well, you can go to the library. You can use the computer at the library. Well, sure, between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. But what if I'm at home and I need to do my homework and it's 10 o'clock at night? I'm not using the computers at the library. People are missing opportunity. They can't do their own businesses. They can't, if they want to be a TikTok influencer, for Pete's sakes, you can't even do that at home if you don't have access to the internet. And so everything that we're doing is about creating opportunity. And it's opportunity for whatever people want to do, meeting them where they're at. Okay. Is it just because they want to learn how to crochet and they need to watch YouTube videos? Well, then they should be able to do that from their couch. Okay. And so those are the kinds of things that we're working on here in Pima County. Our effort is called Connect Pima, to emulate what it is our state library is doing with Connect Arizona. So with that, I think we should transition to Anthony.
Sounds good. Thank you, Michelle. Yeah, so just to talk about a little bit about what the state library has been doing here. So Michelle mentioned, I mentioned earlier, we work a lot with digital inclusion. We try to support the libraries here. We do that first through grants. So we do have express grants through LSTA funding that we offer for Wi-Fi hotspot lending, as well as additional funding for digital inclusion type programs throughout the state. But really our main effort is Connect Arizona, which you can find at connect-arizona.com. And this is a program that was started well before I got to the state library. It was really pioneered by Nicole Umayam, who is our NTIA federal program officer currently. She worked on that for years. And then Aaron came on and worked on it. And now I'm here kind of taking over. And essentially what it is it's a website where you can go and get help finding low-cost internet offers, low-cost devices, and you can speak to one of our digital navigators. And so we're emulating that NDIA model. We have about 10 digital navigators currently, which are library staff. They're located throughout the state. And essentially anyone can call in or they can set up an appointment over email and just talk to someone and get help, whether that's, technology support. They're trying to find some kind of low cost internet plan. We have a lot of resources on the website to kind of supplement that digital navigator model. So we have a page where we list different organizations that provide low-cost devices in Arizona, as well as a page for low-cost internet offers that you can search through. Beyond that, Connect Arizona is also kind of a hub for digital literacy training. So we have a page with technology help videos. Everything is available in English and Spanish. So I know that's a big focus of ours, is making sure that we have it in multiple languages. And we also offer North Star digital literacy. I wanted to point that out too. That's a nice online software that you can use. It's essentially you can take courses to learn about different digital literacy skills. So that's great as well. And this has been kind of it started during the pandemic. It was really a program to get people who weren't able to come into the libraries. And so it's really a virtual model right now, but our hope in the future is to kind of expand it out into a model where we can reach people physically where they are. But yeah, that's a little glimpse at Connect Arizona. I encourage everyone here to visit it and check it out. Yeah, I'll hand it over to Corey.
Thanks, Anthony. So yeah, part of Yavapai County is definitely in some ways different than Pima County in that we don't have a vast or a large population center. We kind of have two communities, Prescott and Prescott Valley, each about 50,000 people, which are the largest communities in the county, with Chino Valley being, I suppose, about another 20, 25,000. Dewey Humboldt probably being 10 to 15,000. Of course, Sedona, which doesn't have a lot of population, but has millions of people that visit it each year as a tourist attraction. I don't think I'm exaggerating with that number either. A lot of people go there. So we have the challenge in a lot of rural counties that we're kind of on the cusp of being something more than rural, but really we have a lot of rural issues. So staffing, personnel, all of that goes along with those kinds of challenges. So we really needed to have a county-wide effort. And in that same context, we're larger than the state of Massachusetts. So Yavapai County is also a very large rural county. So we were fortunate that our superintendent of schools, Tim Carter, had worked about 7 years ago, 7 to 10 years ago, building out our middle mile network through using E-rate funding to all of the schools and libraries throughout the county, which is approximately, I think it was 150 locations that they worked on that too. So having that middle mile infrastructure really helped us when looking at ARPA funds or BEAD funds, especially since BEAD for infrastructure wise is a final mile program. There are some funds available for middle mile network, but the bulk of it is to build out that final mile. So the schools and the libraries were really tasked to, because of the success with the E-rate build out, work on our ARPA build out, because our county board of supervisors realized in order to be competitive, because we're a growing county, we have lots of people moving here, mostly for the climate, because we have 4 mild seasons. But a lot of folks are moving here and they expect to have services like they would have in Los Angeles County, like they would have in Maricopa County, in some of those places they're moving here from. So we leveraged our ARPA funds to start building out $17 million worth of projects with Cox Communications, WeCom, and Sparklight to build out to some of those different areas. So it put us in a good position because we already had a team in place when BEAD came along to start working on seeing what we can do to leverage our successes to help us get some BEAD funding. So we're definitely further along with the infrastructure program than we were with the digital equity program. So I needed somebody on board to have, I don't want to call it a digital navigation program, but we needed to work with the BEAD challenge process. So I had one of my library coordinators really work with that. We did a massive blast to everybody, 80,000 email addresses that we had, saying, if you're not happy with your internet, give us a call. We don't care what the issue is. But our main goal was to try to get people who were BEAD ineligible to report slow speeds so that we could challenge that ineligibility and really make them BEAD eligible. We didn't have a lot of success with that, mainly because of the requirements of the 3 speed tests over 3 days, made it very challenging. But it did get us in contact a lot with the community and really start hearing about what some of their concerns are. So realizing that we're behind the 8 ball on the digital equity process, I reached out, and connections are such a key part to this. And we are so very fortunate in the state of Arizona that many librarians and library staff are in key positions to affect influence in this process. So Aaron, Michelle, Nicole Umayam, who's now the Arizona rep for the NTIA, many people on the Arizona Technology and Information Council. I mean, all these folks coming together that I knew people I could rely on immediately to start helping us with our digital equity initiative. And we're putting together a meeting next month to have Aaron and Michelle and Nicole and Dr. Aaron Carr Jordan with the Digital Equity Institute all come to Yavapai County and talk to what I'm going to call my digital equity team on how we can start putting together a program to make sure our residents in very rural areas can start to benefit from that funding. So I have 3 teams together right now. One is going to be that digital equity team. One is the BEAD build out team for the infrastructure, which has probably about 20 people across many of our organizations, municipalities, nonprofit groups, all working on that end. And then our ARPA build out, which we're in the middle of that project before all those areas are built out too. So we're excited to see where we can go. I think we have a good team in place, and with Michelle, Aaron's, and others' help, we'll continue moving forward.
We need to go ahead and copyright that. The errands. I like that. I wanted to add, I did put it in the chat, but I just wanted to give a little bit of space to that as well. One of the organizations that Corey just mentioned, the Digital Equity Institute, which is it's connected to one of our large universities here, ASU, the Arizona State University, as a nonprofit Research Institute, they were our contractor to help us write our digital equity plan. So, you know, again, these are people who are trusted. The other thing I really wanted to highlight, other than the key piece of partnerships, I know we threw like 8,000 different acronyms at you, but most of them were different funding sources. And I think that that's really key as well, that, you know, there's a lot of stuff going on, and each of those programs has a specific and sometimes narrow focus, but when you're able to mesh them all together, you know, you really are able to make a huge impact, you know, between ARPA and LSTA and E-rate and now digital equity. Like all of those pieces ended up paying for the work that's happening, you know, now and into the future. So I just wanted to give some space for that as well. So at this point, I would love to hear if there are questions. I did see, so sorry that I kind of missed it as it was happening, but Don, I see a question here from you about how many higher education institutions are located in the county. I think you said that when Michelle was talking. I'm not sure if you're interested just in Pima County, but we can answer that generally. We have 3 major universities, and then community colleges and trade schools and career colleges spread out all across the state. And I will give more, you know, space for other people to add to this, but as far as the digital equity plan is concerned, there's a huge intersection there between the workforce development pieces of the BEAD program, so the infrastructure piece, and our Digital Equity Act planning and implementation as well. Being able to leverage especially the trade and career college aspect in addition to the institutes of higher education, more traditional 4-year colleges, and then the community colleges as well. Those will be places where you know, people can be trained up quickly to actually be the, you know, part of the implementation of the BEAD plan, but also the digital equity growth that can come out of partnerships with those universities, making sure that everyone is well equipped to enter the workforce. And total side note, as I mentioned at the in my intro, I've worked in academic libraries. I've actually worked in career college libraries as well. And that was something that, you know, I wasn't surprised by, but it, you know, was a reaffirmation that folks get to those levels of education without basic digital literacy skills in today's world. You know, I have a rising 7th grader who, if she didn't live with a librarian and a technologist, would have had 0 opportunities, you know, to formally learn how to use computers. You know, just because we have, you know, a prevalence of cell phones and a prevalence of devices doesn't mean that kiddos coming up through school have, you know, those really efficient digital literacy skills that they're going to need not only in college, but into the workforce. And so that's something that we're really taking a look at here in Arizona as well. And I think, you know, I don't think there's anyone from NTIA on the call, right? So I can say this, like, I think we missed an opportunity with our planning, not naming K-12 or K-20 students as its own covered population to be, you know, looking at. Obviously, the inequities are not the same as they are with other covered populations, but it's a spot where you can break down those barriers, because if the kiddos coming up have these skills and these resources and know what's what, they're less likely to become adults in those covered populations that have those same barriers. And so we're really looking at that closely here in Arizona. Don, I see your hand is up. Was there a follow-up to your higher education question?
Yes, ma'am. I did the librarian thing. I asked the question and then I got curious and answered my own question. I apologize. I couldn't help myself.
As we do.
You know, you've said a lot that I would have said, but one thing I will add to that is that in terms of this conversation, one of the biggest mistakes that's made is this assumption that every child has access to the technology that their child has. And I've been working on this for at least 10 years. And so my empathetic response to that is that, sure, you know, you're going to think that, but decisions, the problem is not so much that the person is thinking that my child is like your child. The problem is that decisions are made to not fund training because they assume that everybody is like their child. And that's really where the big problem has been, is I think that I've been working on, that people are making that assumption, and that assumption is making bad decisions as far as I'm concerned, because there's a collateral damage to that when you don't include that 2% or that 17% of your student population, and almost make them non-existent. So yeah, that you said a lot and you pretty much covered it, but I just wanted to make that point. Okay.
Thank you so much. You are right on with that. And that is so true. You know, Corey, I see your hand up too, and I don't want to take the time away from you, but it always makes me kind of chuckle a little bit when, you know, you hear the answer of, oh, well, we'll have the teens run the digital navigator program. Well, how do you know the teens have the skills before you sent them out, you know, to educate? You know, people are making that assumption again, right? That they have the skills and they have access to all of that. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, if I could, speaking on the school front, one of the things that was really interesting is I was on a school board, a governing board during the pandemic, and it was a very challenging time. And when we were handing out hotspots and Chromebooks to family members that we got through the ECF program, uh, they're like, "Well, how do we use this stuff?" And I was directing them all to the state library, to the digital navigators, to have them answer those questions. But how many school districts didn't know that that resource was even available because they didn't have a librarian on their board to help answer those kinds of questions? And to that same front, we have a county school librarian who works for the library district, which serves primarily public libraries, who will go out and in the classroom teach digital navigation to the students on behalf of the teachers. So those teachers don't have to have those skills. Our librarian goes in and teaches those students directly about what those skills are, and why they should have them and how they're beneficial.
We just need to make Susie available to every school district, right? And I'm sure folks have been noticing this, but Michelle's been dropping a ton of really great resources in the chat too about you know, places to find more information too. So definitely download that before anything gets lost. Are there other questions that folks have for us?
Yeah, I have a question, Erin. How are you doing?
Great. How are you?
Good to see you again.
Nice to see you too,
One of
James.
the things that I've been trying to pay attention to as state broadband offices, state libraries, engage with the federal funding opportunities, is how much collaboration, information sharing, partnering is taking place. Certainly, you know, I've had my eye on a couple of states, including the state of Maine, Arizona, North Carolina in particular, places where I know a few folks and places where I've observed some good work being done. But what has your experience been as a leading state in these efforts with being able to share with others your knowledge, expertise, and experience? Thank you.
Thank you. So that's a wonderful question. I'm going to answer it a couple of different ways. So first of all, with our communities, we are being very intentional about maintaining the relationships that were built during the planning periods for both the BEAD and digital equity. So even though it's not a requirement from NTIA for us to do this, we're engaging on a second round of an engagement tour this year to ensure that the communities that we started to build relationships with during the planning and before we're moving into implementation still get to hear from us. We've been traveling around the state and are continuing to do that, providing updates on both the BEAD and digital equity piece. As far as partnerships within the funding model, I think that's a separate answer that I'd like to give. Here in Arizona, we are only receiving, and I realize that seems like a lot of money, but it's not. $16 million, a little over $16 million for the Digital Equity Act. And I know I've got friends from other states who are like, wow, I wish I had $16 million, right? There's a wide range state to state of how much funding every digital equity program will receive. And so I like to talk about how important those partnerships will be to spread those dollars. So we actually put out a pre-application survey. And I know there are folks from New Mexico on here too, and so I'll give credit where credit is due. I totally stole the idea from their broadband office to put out a survey. For us, it's not a requirement, a precursor in any way to application when we get that funding, but we do want to just kind of get an idea of what organizations are already thinking about those partnerships. And so we've already received about a dozen or so responses, again, to a totally optional survey, but it's really great to see how many of them are considering working with other organizations in their communities. And I think that, you know, the way that I'm thinking about these capacity subgrants within the states for states that are able to do it, I'm really looking at them as pilots, right? Like if I could give you, and I'm making up the dollar amount, so nobody quote me, okay? You know, if I could give you, you know, couple $1,000, $10,000, even $50,000. What can you do with that? And then you can use that knowledge of what you gain from the project that we can fund with the capacity dollars to continue to apply for more. You know, and it kind of goes back to my comment earlier about how many different funding sources people are already using for the programs that are already existing. I see the capacity grant and any potential subgrants that states are able to give as another link in that chain of you know, being able to leverage and then use what you learn from the grant you got from me, you know, to apply for the next one. So I realize that that's not as complete of an answer as maybe I could give in a couple of months, but that's kind of where we're looking right now. Thank you for that question.
Aaron, do you mind if I add a little bit to that?
Go for it.
I'll say from the BEAD side, from the infrastructure side, there have been several groups that have been put together here, the Arizona Broadband Stakeholders Network, where ISPs, universities, colleges, governing authorities, the state, nonprofits all get together, and the schools talk about what their issues are. They do presentations on what can be done. So that's been very beneficial. The same thing with the Arizona Telecommunications and Information Council. That's been beneficial. The libraries in the state have always been great about partnering together. So there's been lots of discussions on that front as well. And then plus some of our elected officials and managers, county managers, city managers have their own forums where they're getting together and partnering and talking about how the state can best leverage those dollars. I'll say from the digital equity perspective, this is one of those things where when the state says, how would you like to spend this money? I'm going, I have no idea. All I know is that digital navigators are awesome and they work. If you ask for me outside of that, I don't have a lot of ideas, which is why I'm kind of excited to hear about what the folks that do have ideas have. So partnering is key in that area as well.
And not every state is doing subgrants, but you know, ours are going to be built around responding to the goals and objectives laid out in the digital equity plan. So, you know, if there's a bit of, you know, advice I would give, it's that, you know, if you haven't had the opportunity to take a look at your state's digital equity plan, do that definitely. And, you know, if you see your work fitting into some of the goals and objectives that your state laid out, you know, that's a really great way to kind of slot your library work into what might be applied for. Definitely. Just to fill some of the space while folks are thinking if they've got other questions, I would also just really recommend, of course, this group is amazing. There are other monthly calls that bring together people who are working in these spaces. The Shelby organization, that's the schools and libraries. Oh gosh, I just totally blanked on the acronym there, but they have monthly calls. Megan's like, I'll tell you what it is. And of course the NDIA calls. There are a lot of amazing places just to hear what's going on in other states. And my Thank you, Michelle. And my favorite part of going to those is, kind of what Corey just said, right? Like, just because you haven't had the thought doesn't mean you have to come up with everything on your own, right? A lot of states are going to be doing very similar things over the next few years. And so just like good librarians, we should 100% be looking at our neighboring district's calendar and saying, wow, that sounds like a really cool program. I wonder if that would work here, right? And so I would highly recommend that. Most of these organizations have listservs too. So if you don't have the capacity to attend a bunch of, meetings, just being on the listservs, watching some of the, watching some of the recordings, if you have space for that, that's great. Your local, your state's library association is probably also working in this space. I know ours are here in Arizona. And so, staying in touch with all of those. And you know what, if you go to one of those things and you're not seeing digital inclusion or digital equity related conversations happening, you can be the one to start them, and you can start your coalition, right? You can start that group. And I think that, as more of this comes into the public knowledge, right? Like, there will be support for it, there will be interest, even if you're the one who starts it. I hope I haven't missed any questions in the chat. I haven't been able to read everything. Did anyone notice any other questions that we may have missed?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Like you said, a lot of great information being shared. I didn't see any other questions.
Well, and I don't want to speak for the other folks on the call, but I am happy to have, follow-ups or email conversations with folks. Hey, I want to ask this question to my state broadband office. Can I run it by you first? Happy to do it, right? I'll just put my email in the chat too. I don't know if it's been shared, but.
Yeah, thank you, Erin. And folks can, of course, use our ALA Connect space to ask questions. We'll be keeping an eye on that. I know at least Erin of our presenters is there. I hope everyone is there. So we hope to keep this conversation going. Erin, Anthony, Michelle, and Corey, thank you all so much. This was a really, really good conversation. I definitely learned a lot. I hope others learned a lot. Yeah, now is the time. There's a lot going on, so it's really interesting to hear the perspective from the state and what you all are working on to